Hi, my name is Keshav Khatri and welcome to my channel KK Research Studies. So in this video, we are going to talk about scientific research process. So any process that involves systematic steps to carry out any form of research and that eventually leads us to a logical conclusion, that kind of process can be termed as the scientific research process. It's a systematic process and the entire research process can be divided into two components: process and design. In process, we normally talk about problem identification, problem definition, literature review, conceptual framework, theoretical framework, whereas in design component, we talk about research methodologies, different forms of tools and techniques that we use to collect the data, analyze the data, and etc. So in this video, or in this slide, we can see that the entire research process can be divided into 10 steps, starting from observation to the report writing. And observation is the first step. We sense the problem. It's a step where we want to answer the question, why to do the research, what to do the research, when to do the research. So it's a broad area of the research interest, but it's very important step of the entire research process, because this is the step where we try to think over an issue. We try to think over a problem and try to get the solution on it, or try to get more knowledge on it. So for example, I am a manager in a factory, and in my factory there's a rule that all the staff members, they have to bring their own lunch box, and we all have to gather in the dining hall during the lunch recess, and have our lunch together. But for some time, I've been observing that some of our staffs, they're not coming to the dining hall during the lunch break. The question pops up in my mind, why? Why are they not coming? So that's the point where I start digging the information. I start knowing more about the issue. So that's called the observation step. So another example we can discuss, like few of my friends, we discussed like what could be the factors that impact the stock returns in the Nepalese stock market. So after discussing a lot, we finally decided to do a mini research on that, because we know that we want to understand the factors that affect the stock return, but we do not know what are the factors. So it's completely a very broad area for us. So it's not specific. So, but we had an idea, we had an issue to discuss on, we had an issue to do the research on. So after we sensed this issue of stock return, or what are the factors that could impact the stock return, then we moved on to the second step, that is the preliminary data gathering. We talked to the stakeholders such as investors, bankers, stock market dealers and brokers. And at the same time, we went for a small literature review, because we wanted to know like what is there in the literature, what are the factors in different parts of the world that are impacting the stock returns. So after doing a short literature review and after interviewing and discussing with the relevant stakeholders, we came to know that there are so many factors impacting the stock market return. For example, firm-specific factors and macroeconomic factors. And at the same time, we also came to know that different forms of returns are there. For example, adjusted return, excess return, abnormal return. And we also came to know that each investor has his or her own perception towards the stock market and the stock market return. So that was completely a very new knowledge and a very new information for us to move on in this research process. So after gathering those information, now we are ready to define the problem, what we are actually looking for. So then we move on to the third step of the research process, that is problem definition. Now, this problem definition is very important step in any research, because this is the step that guides the researcher to move in the correct direction, that gives a streamlined path for the researcher to come to a logical conclusion. Because if you do not define the problem, then you will not be able to do the research in the proper way. So here in our example, we can see that our definition was what firm-specific factors affect stock returns in Nepalese non-financial firms that are listed in the Nepalese stock market. So now, once we have the definition of this problem, we are completely clear that what are we going to study, what are we going to look for. For example, we are just concentrating on the firm-specific factors, and we are just concentrating on the non-financial firms that are listed in the Nepalese stock market. Others we're just leaving out. So we're just focusing on these. Now, this helps the researcher to get more information. This helps the researcher to get accurate information that is needed for the research. So after we define the problem, then we move on to the literature review. So here in this section of the literature review, it's a broad section where we want to know more about the problem. We want to know more about different factors that can affect the stock returns. And also we want to know theoretically and empirically, like what are the factors that have been observed to impact the stock returns in different parts of the world and in different periods of time and different types of economies. So in literature review generally gives us a sound theoretical knowledge, and at the same time, it gives us a good understanding of the empirical findings that will be very much helpful while we come to the conclusion part at the time of discussing our results. So once we do the literature review, the next step would be the theoretical framework. So now in literature review, while we try to understand the theory behind our problem, for example, in our case, we had the theory of capital assets pricing model and then arbitrage pricing theory. So based on those theories and based on the empirical findings that have been carried out, that have been found in different parts of the world at different periods of time, we selected different variables for us. For example, for firm-specific variables, firm size, leverage, book-to-market ratio, earning yield. So these are the 4 variables that we selected for our study as the independent variable. And in regard to the dependent variable, we selected stock adjusted return, or we can say stock return, which is adjusted. So adjusted here means the dividend is adjusted to the capital gain. So now we are ready with our variables, both the independent variables and the dependent variables. We have the theory of capital assets pricing model and APT, that is assets arbitrage pricing theory. So we are now ready to go to build up our hypothesis. So normally in quantitative studies, we know the dependent and the independent variables, so we develop the hypothesis so that the hypothesis can be tested through the statistical measures at the end. So here in this case, while formulating the hypothesis, our hypothesis, for example, could be like firm size has negative impact on the stock return. So higher the size or the bigger the size, they have low return in the Nepalese stock market. And this relationship of negative has been assumed or has been hypothesized based on the empirical findings in different parts of the world. So in this way, we try to develop the hypothesis for all the variables. Now, once we have the hypothesis, then we move on to the next step, that is the research methodology. Now, this research methodology is very important, again, very important part of the research, because this is the part where we actually have to mention everything about how are we going to collect the data, what are the data sources, and what will be the population size, what will be the sample, everything we have to discuss. And the most important thing is that we are going to identify our ourselves, like whether, in terms of philosophy, whether I'm a positivist or I'm a post-positivist, I'm a interpretivist, I am constructivist. So my philosophical stand has to be cleared in this research methodology. So once I have cleared my philosophical stand, once I have identified my philosophical stand, it'll be easy for me to develop the research design. For example, in our study, our philosophical stand was positivist philosophy, and based on that, our research design was quantitative research design. So here in this part, once we have the quantitative research design, then we will try to assemble all the aspects of that design so that it'll be easy for us to collect the data. It'll be easy for us to analyze the data. It'll be easy for us to interpret those data. So that is why research methodology is very, very important aspect of this of any research. So after that, we move on to the next step, that is the data collection, analysis, and interpretation. So once we have the design, once we have uh, noted out like what are the statistical tools and techniques that we are going to employ to collect the data, to analyze the data, then we move on to the study area, to the field, to collect the data. And then once we collect the data, we have to clean those data. We have to make those data editable, and at the same time to make those data to be analyzed in the, so we have to clean those data. And after that, we do the analysis of this data, and whatever the results come, we just interpret those results in that section. Okay, so we are not going to discuss those results with the other findings, but we're just going to interpret what has been found through the analysis of those data. So in our case, we collected the data from the secondary sources, like we got the data from the financial, non-financial institutions bank annual reports, and the data from the Nepal Stock Exchange. And we in the analysis part, we did the descriptive studies, and then we did the correlation to see the relationship between different variables. And then we did the regression analysis to see the impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable and the significance of that impact. So once we did that, then we moved on to the other section, that is the 9th section, which is discussion, conclusion, and generalization. So here in discussion, once whatever results have been found in step 8, so those results have to be discussed with the findings that are carried out, that are observed in the literature review, okay, in the empirical review, because we have to discuss, like in similar circumstances, what are the results obtained in different parts of the world in different periods of time. So this is very important part again, because the more discussion we can do with our results, the more discussion we can bring in, the more reliable our results will be, the more authentic and acceptable our results could be. So after discussion, then we conclude what is the final outcome of our research, the entire process, what is the final outcome. So that conclusion could be a one-liner conclusion or a two-liner conclusion. In our case, for example, our conclusion could be like, among the form-specific variables, form size has significant and negative impact on the stock market return in the Nepalese stock market among the non-financial firms in Nepal. So that could be a single liner impact. Okay, so if all the variables are showing significant impact on the stock adjusted return, then we can say that the one liner could be in context of Nepalese stock market, firm specific factors have significant impact on the Nepalese non-financial firms. So that could be conclusion of our entire research. So this is how we do the conclusion. And if we are doing the research with plenty of data, I mean, if we have a good number of data, international data, then in that case we can generalize our results as well. But in our case, we had very less data, and it was only focused to the Nepalese stock market. So generalization was not possible for us. But if we have a good amount of data, in that case, we can also proceed on with the generalization as well. We can generalize our findings with the others as well, or in other contexts as well. So once we do that, the final step we arrive is the report writing. So this is the step where we present everything that we have carried out so far in a format, in the chapters, in the book format. Okay, so we have different chapters, and in those chapters we are going to put everything in a systematic order, and we will be writing the report. So that report could be like thesis or dissertation, a research report, an article, journal article, something like that. So this is the entire step that we discussed about the research, scientific research process. And from observation 1 till observation 6 is the process, whereas Step 6 is the process, whereas step 7 and step 8 can be said as the design as component of the entire process. So, and one important thing that I really want to share with you all is literature review. This is one of the very important aspect of the research, because this literature review, though we have kept here in the 4th step, but this literature review comes from right from the beginning, and it always helps the researcher to support with different ideas, different knowledge. If there is any confusion in any step, then the researcher can always go back to the literature review and then clear his or her doubts. So that is why literature review is very, very important. And it is advisable that we have a very good literature review. I mean, we have got very sound literature, highly accepted literature, and good sources and reliable sources while collecting the literature. So thank you so much. I think we have managed to understand the scientific research process. And in our next videos, we'll be talking more about business research. See you then. Thank you so much.